move! Get back! Hands where I can see them! You're under arrest! Go! I can't do this!
The day started out like any other Thursday afternoon in Germantown, Wisconsin. At a local Fleet Farm store, the aisles were filled with people just trying to get their shopping done. But among the regular customers, someone was watching a man named Jesse very closely. A loss prevention employee noticed that Jesse was acting strange. Instead of putting items in a cart, Jesse was hiding sweatshirts under his heavy jacket. He didn't stop there. He began stuffing energy drinks and various other items into a black backpack he was carrying. The employee kept a sharp eye on him as Jesse moved through the store, clearly trying to hide what he was doing. To the store staff, it looked like a simple case of retail theft, the kind they see far too often. They didn't know yet that these few stolen items were about to cause a giant mess. While Jesse was busy filling his bag, his friend Mark was waiting outside in a red Chevrolet Cruze. Mark had actually dozed off for a bit, totally unaware of what his friend was doing inside the store. Outside, the first police officer arrived and spotted Jesse coming out of the Fleet Farm. The officer tried to walk up and talk to him, hoping to settle things quickly. But the second Jesse saw the police, he didn't stop or try to explain. He took off running as fast as he could toward the red car where Mark was still resting. Jesse's heart was pounding as he reached the car, and he began screaming at Mark to wake up and drive away. That small moment of shoplifting was over, but a much bigger and more dangerous problem was just beginning for everyone involved. The moment Jesse reached the red Chevrolet Cruze, the entire situation changed. He didn't just get into the car, he scrambled inside while screaming at Mark to go, go, go. Mark, who had been resting and was feeling very sleepy, woke up in a state of total confusion. He didn't know about the theft at the Fleet Farm, and for a split second, he actually thought someone was trying to attack his friend. Panicked and acting on pure instinct, Mark slammed the car into gear and pulled out of the parking lot. It wasn't until they were already exiting onto the main road that Mark finally looked in his rearview mirror and saw the flashing lights of a police squad car right behind them. At that point, the reality of the situation should have set in, but the pressure inside the car was too high. Jesse wasn't just sitting there, he was acting like a navigator, directing Mark exactly where to turn and which roads to take. Even though Mark was the one with his hands on the wheel, he felt like he wasn't in control anymore. The officer behind them called for backup, reporting that the suspects were refusing to stop. As the red car accelerated onto the highway, the slow-paced theft from just moments ago had officially turned into a high-speed chase. The engine roared as they hit the open road, and for Jax and Rico, there was no turning back now. The red Chevrolet Cruze roared as it merged onto the busy highway, officially starting a dangerous game of cat and mouse. Jax gripped the steering wheel tight, his knuckles turning white as the speedometer climbed higher and higher. Behind them, the police sirens were no longer just a distant noise, they were a constant, screaming reminder that there was nowhere left to hide. Officers on the radio called out their position, labeling the situation as at 10-80, the code for a high-speed pursuit. The red car began weaving in and out of lanes, forcing innocent drivers to slam on their brakes and swerve out of the way. Inside the car, the air was thick with tension. Rico was shouting instructions, his eyes darting back and forth, looking for any gap in the traffic they could squeeze through. The police weren't backing down. Multiple squad cars joined the chase, their lights reflecting off the red paint of the Cruze. They tried to get ahead to set up traps, but Jax, fueled by panic and Rico's constant screaming, kept pushing the car to its limits. Every time an officer tried to get close, Jax would swerve, nearly clipping other vehicles. It was a terrifying sight for anyone on the road that afternoon. What started as a small mistake at a store had now become a fast-moving disaster that was putting everyone's life in danger. The high-speed chase reached a breaking point when the police decided it was time to use a tactical move to stop the red Chevrolet Cruze. An officer positioned his heavy squad car behind the Cruze as they approached a highway on-ramp. With a quick and precise steer, the officer performed a pit maneuver, striking the back corner of the red car with just enough force to send it into a spin. The red car swerved wildly before slamming sideways against a concrete barrier on the side of the road. The sound of metal crunching against the wall echoed through the air as the car finally came to a stop, pinned in place by the police vehicle. Dust and debris settled around the wreckage, and for a moment, everything went silent. Officers immediately jumped out of their cars with their weapons drawn, screaming for the suspects to show their hands and stay exactly where they were. Jax, sitting in the driver's seat, was visibly shaken and appeared ready to give up. He lifted his hands high, showing the officers that he wasn't holding anything. The chase had been terrifying, and it looked like the danger was finally over. The police moved in closer, their voices loud and firm, demanding that nobody reach for anything. Jack stared at the officers, his face filled with fear, seemingly accepting that the journey had ended right there on that concrete ramp. The situation on the highway on-ramp was incredibly tense. Jack sat in the driver's seat with his hands raised high, his face showing a clear sign that he was done fighting. To the officers standing outside with their guns drawn, it looked like the dangerous chase had finally reached its end. But inside the car, the energy was very different. Rico was not ready to go to jail. In a shocking move of betrayal, Rico lunged across the center console toward the steering wheel. While Jax was trying to surrender, Rico was busy reaching for the gear shift and the ignition. He didn't care that the police were mere feet away or that Jax had already given up. Rico's only goal was to get the red car moving again, no matter the cost. Before the officers could react, the engine roared back to life. Rico pushed the car back into gear and slammed his foot down, forcing Jax to take off once again. Jax was caught in a nightmare, trapped in the driver's seat of a car he no longer truly controlled. Because of Rico's desperate choice, the surrender was cancelled, and the chase was back on. The red Cruze peeled away from the concrete barrier, leaving the officers behind and putting everyone back into extreme danger. At that moment, it became clear that Jax wasn't just running from the police, he was trapped by a friend who wouldn't let him stop. The red car tore away from the on-ramp, leaving a cloud of dust and the sounds of shouting officers behind. Jax felt his heart hammering against his ribs like a trapped bird. He was no longer just a driver, he was a passenger in his own life, forced to steer a car that Rico had restarted against his will. The speedometer climbed higher as they merged back onto the busy interstate, and the high-speed chaos reached a new, terrifying level. Traffic was heavy, but Jax didn't slow down. Guided by Rico's frantic pointing and yelling, the Cruze began weaving through lanes at speeds that made the world outside look like a blur. Other drivers honked their horns and swerved toward the shoulders of the road to avoid being hit. The red car brushed past bumpers and mirrors, coming inches away from causing a giant pileup. Behind them, the police were not giving up. Multiple squad cars followed, their sirens wailing in a loud, constant rhythm that filled the cabin of the car. Every time an officer tried to get close enough to pull them over, Jax would swerve again, cutting across 3 lanes of traffic at once. The air inside the car felt heavy and hot. Rico kept looking out the back window, his face tight with anger and fear, while Jax just stared straight ahead, his hands shaking on the wheel. They were moving so fast that one tiny mistake would end everything. The chase had moved from a side road to a major highway, and the stakes were now higher than they had ever been. As the red car sped away, the situation inside became even more chaotic. Rico was desperate to keep the police away, and he began looking for anything he could use as a weapon. He reached into the back of the car and found heavy cinder blocks and large rocks that were being kept on the floorboard. Without hesitating, he began hurling these boulders out of the window toward the pursuing officers. The officers watched in shock as the heavy rocks skipped across the interstate like stones on water. One officer reported over the radio that the suspects were whipping rocks and energy drinks at their windshields, trying to smash the glass and force the police to stop. It was an incredibly dangerous move that put not only the officers but also every other driver on the highway at risk of a major accident. Jax was still stuck behind the wheel, steering the car while Rico continued his attack from the passenger seat. The police had to keep their distance to avoid being hit by the flying debris, which gave the suspects a small amount of space to keep running. However, the officers were now more determined than ever to end the chase before someone got seriously hurt by the objects being thrown from the car. The red Cruze was falling apart, with the rear bumper hanging off, but Rico refused to let Jax slow down. The chase finally reached its breaking point as the red Chevrolet Cruze continued to fall apart while flying down the highway. With the rear bumper dragging and the car shaking from the high speeds, the police saw their chance to end the danger for good. One officer moved his squad car into position, carefully matching the speed of the spinning tires before striking the back of the Cruze once more. This final pit maneuver was perfect. The red car spun out of control, sliding across the pavement in a cloud of smoke and dust. It did not stop until it slammed hard into a ditch on the side of the road, leaving it stuck and unable to move again. The loud roar of the engine finally died down, replaced by the heavy sound of sirens surrounding the wreckage. Officers quickly swarmed the area with their lights flashing, effectively boxing the car in so there was no way left to run. They didn't take any chances this time. They jumped out of their vehicles with their guns aimed at the windows, screaming for the suspects to put their hands up and get out of the car. Jax and Rico were trapped in the crumpled remains of the cruise, and for the first time since the Fleet Farm theft, the car was truly silent. The long, terrifying flight was over, but the most intense part of the arrest was just seconds away. The red Chevrolet Cruze sat ruined in the ditch, its engine finally silent after the long, dangerous chase. But the danger was far from over. Because the suspects had already tried to run away once after being stopped, the officers were not taking any chances. They swarmed the car with their guns pointed at the windows, their voices loud and shaking with adrenaline as they screamed for Jax and Rico to show their hands. Rico, sitting in the passenger seat, was still acting difficult and refused to follow orders. Seeing that the suspects were not complying, one officer made a tough decision. "I'm getting a dog out," he shouted to the other officers. He pulled his canine partner, a powerful German Shepherd, from the back of the squad car. The dog was barking fiercely, its teeth showing as it lunged toward the red car, ready to do its job. "Watch him! Watch! Keep your hands off," the officer yelled as the dog pulled at its leash. Jax, terrified by the sight of the barking dog so close to his face, began to panic. "I don't want the dog to bite me," he pleaded, his voice high and full of fear. The officer didn't let up, commanding Jax to take 5 steps toward him slowly. With the canine lunging just inches away, Jax finally realized that there was no more help coming from Rico and no more room to run. One by one, the suspects were pulled from the wreckage and forced onto the ground, while the canine stood guard, ensuring the chase had truly reached its end. With Jax and Rico finally in handcuffs, the high-speed adrenaline faded away, leaving only the cold reality of what they had done. As the officers moved the 2 men toward the back of separate squad cars, the quiet of the highway was filled with the sound of Jax's voice, which was now shaking with anger and regret. He looked over at Rico, the friend who had lunged for the wheel and forced him to keep running even when he wanted to give up. "What the F***, dude? What the F***? Jax yelled, his face twisted with frustration. "You're the one driving away from us." Rico, however, didn't seem to feel bad at all. He shouted back, admitting that he was the one in control, saying, "I told him to, man. I told him to drive." The officers didn't want to hear the arguing. They told the men to shut up and sit down, but Jax couldn't stop himself from asking why Rico had ruined everything. "Why you got to be like that?" Jax asked, feeling the weight of the handcuffs on his wrists. An officer looked at them both and reminded them that their choices had put every single person on that highway in danger. As Jax sat on the hard seat of the police car, he realized that his loyalty to Rico had led him straight into a felony nightmare. The friendship that had started the day was now completely broken by the side of the road. With the suspects secured, the police began the important task of searching the wrecked red Cruze to find out exactly what Jax and Rico had been hiding. The officers put on their blue gloves and began digging through the mess left behind by the high-speed chase. It didn't take long to find evidence of their crimes. Inside the car, the floor was covered in trash and stolen goods from the Fleet Farm. Officers found the black backpack Jesse had used to hide his loot. Inside were several sweatshirts and a large number of energy drinks that had been tossed around during the pit maneuvers. They also found the boulders Rico had been throwing, huge cinder blocks and heavy rocks that were still sitting on the floorboard. As they searched further, the officers found items that were much more serious than simple shoplifting. Tucked away in the seats and door pockets were small notebooks filled with addresses and shopping lists, along with lighters and candy. But the biggest discovery came when an officer looked into a small white plastic pan and a metal smoking pipe. They found a white powder and black burnt residue that looked like illegal drugs. The officers also noticed that the car's interior was heavily damaged, with pieces of the dashboard broken and wires sticking out from where Rico had lunged to restart the engine. It was clear that this car was more than just a getaway vehicle, it was a rolling crime scene filled with dangerous secrets. The search of the red car continued as the officers looked through every corner of the messy interior. Near the back of the car, they found a metal bucket, also called a tin. Inside the tin were the ashes of Jesse's mom. Jesse was very worried about this item and asked the officers if his brother could come and pick it up along with the car keys. The officers told him they would have to wait for a supervisor to check everything first. While looking closer, the officers also found more items used for drugs. They spotted a copper and blue metal pipe and a small bowl that had black burnt marks inside it. There was also a white plastic pan that had a white powder residue left in it. Along with these dangerous items, the car was filled with things like candies, lighters, and 2 small notebooks that had addresses and shopping lists written inside. The officers also found several sweatshirts Jesse had tried to steal, some of which he was still wearing when he was caught. The car was a complete mess, with energy drinks and large rocks scattered everywhere. After the officers finished their search, they called for a tow truck to take the red Cruze away since it was too damaged to drive. Jax and Rico were then taken to the police station to answer for all the trouble they had caused that afternoon. Once they arrived at the police station, the 2 friends were separated so officers could hear their stories. Jesse, who had been the one throwing rocks and stealing from the store, didn't have much to say to the police. He refused to talk about the details of the crime, though he did offer a small apology for his actions. He told the officers he was sorry for putting them in danger during the wild chase. The officers were still trying to figure out who owned the different phones found in the wrecked car. While Jesse stayed mostly quiet, he did try to be polite to the officer who had been behind them during the pursuit. He even mentioned that he saw a beef jerky steak during the chaos. Even though Jesse wouldn't give a full statement, he was clearly the one who had been in charge during the escape. He admitted that he was the one who told Mark to drive away from the Fleet farm. He seemed to realize that the situation was very serious, especially since he was already out on bail for other problems. While Jesse sat in his cell, the officers moved to the next room to talk to Mark, who was much more willing to tell his side of the story. The quiet apology from Jesse was nice, but it wouldn't be enough to fix the huge mess he had created for both of them. Inside the quiet interrogation room, Mark sat down to give his side of the story. Unlike Jesse, Mark was very willing to talk to the officers and explain what had happened from his perspective. He looked tired and spoke in a way that showed he was still confused by how quickly things had gone wrong. Mark told the officers that he had no idea Jesse was planning to steal anything when they pulled up to the Fleet farm. He explained that he had actually dozed off in the driver's seat and was lethargic when Jesse suddenly jumped back into the car. When Jesse started screaming "Go, go, go," Mark said he panicked because he thought someone was trying to attack his friend. He admitted that he realized the police were chasing them almost as soon as they left the parking lot. However, he claimed that Jesse was directing him the entire time, telling him exactly where to drive. Mark's most important point was about the moment he tried to surrender. He told the officers that after the first pit maneuver, he put his hands up because he wanted to stop. He explained that Jesse was the one who reached over, put the car back in park, turned the key to restart the engine, and forced the chase to continue. When asked about the drugs found in the car, Mark admitted he knew there was residue in the vehicle. He even told officers about a bomb Jesse had made that contained a pipe and mentioned that some paper found on him had previously held heroin. By the end of the talk, Mark made it clear that while he was the one driving, he felt like he was just a tool being used by his friend. After the interrogation was finished, the police had to wait for the results from the laboratory to confirm what exactly was in the car. The scientists tested the white powder, the residue inside the metal pipes, and the small pieces of paper found on Mark. The results were even more serious than the officers first thought. The lab tests came back positive for several dangerous substances. They found marijuana and cocaine, but most importantly, they found fentanyl. Fentanyl is an extremely powerful and dangerous drug that can be deadly even in very small amounts. Finding this in the car changed the situation from a simple theft and a chase into a major drug case. Because of these lab results, the charges against Jax and Rico became much heavier. It wasn't just about the stolen energy drinks or the wild driving anymore. The presence of these illegal drugs meant that both men were now facing serious felony counts for possession of controlled substances on top of everything else. For Jax, knowing that these drugs were in the car made his choice to follow Rico's go even more of a disaster for his future. The science proved that the dynamic duo wasn't just running from a shoplifting charge, they were carrying things that could destroy lives. The long legal process finally came to an end in a Wisconsin courtroom. After months of waiting, both men had to face a judge to hear their final punishments for the chaos they caused on February 22. The courtroom was quiet as the judge looked over the police reports, the lab results showing the fentanyl and cocaine, and the video of the dangerous highway chase. Mark, the driver who had tried to put his hands up during the chase, was given a lighter sentence because he took responsibility for his part in the crime. In August 2024, he pleaded guilty to several charges, including vehicle fleeing and resisting an officer. The judge sentenced Mark to 1 year in state prison. After he finishes his time behind bars, he will have to spend 2 more years under extended supervision, which means he will be watched closely by the law to make sure he stays out of trouble. Jesse, however, faced a much harsher reality. Because he was the one who stole from the Fleet Farm, threw heavy rocks at police cars, and forced Mark to keep driving, his crimes were seen as much more dangerous. Jesse pleaded guilty to felony retail theft and recklessly endangering safety. The judge sentenced Jesse to 8 years in state prison. Once he is released, he will stay under supervision for another 6 years. This story serves as a serious lesson about the people we choose to call friends. What started as a simple trip to a store ended with 2 men losing years of their lives to the prison system. In the end, Mark's decision to listen to Jesse's go, instead of following his own heart and surrendering cost him his freedom. It is a reminder that when your friend won't let you do the right thing, you might be the one paying the price in a cold prison cell.